Man, this one hits different. James Avery wasn't just another actor, he was the heartbeat of a generation. For millions who grew up watching The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, he wasn't Uncle Phil, he was family. The way he carried himself strong, wise, loving, he became the father figure so many of us never had. And that moment, when Will broke down and cried, "How come he don't want me, man?" That wasn't just acting. That was real. You could feel it. But behind that powerful presence was a man of deep talent, discipline, and heart, a poet, a veteran, and a teacher whose story deserves more than just a sitcom memory. So what really happened to James Avery, and why does his legacy still hit so hard? Let's get into his story right now. Let me know where you're watching this from in the comments. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of water or tea, sit back, and let's start this journey together. James LaRue Avery was born on the 27th of November, 1945, in the small town of Pughesville, Virginia, a place that didn't have much, but had heart. He came into the world at a time when America was still deeply segregated. Growing up black in the mid-20th century South meant you learned strength early. Man, not because you wanted to, but because you had to. His mother, Florence Avery, raised him mostly on her own after the family moved to Atlantic City, New Jersey, following World War II. Money was tight, but Florence worked hard to make sure her son understood the value of education and self-respect. James didn't come from show business or privilege. He came from the kind of background where people hustled just to make ends meet. But even as a kid, he had this curiosity, this quiet intensity. Teachers noticed how articulate he was, how he loved reading poetry and performing in front of the class. He had a big presence even back then. Folks would say, "That boy got something in him." In his teenage years, the family relocated to San Diego, California. For a young black man in the early 1960s, California felt like a different world, still full of challenges, but also new possibilities. James found himself caught between two Americas, one that tried to hold him back, and one that whispered, "You can be more." He attended high school there, developing an interest in literature, debate, and theater. But life wasn't easy. With limited resources, he took whatever work he could get, helping his mom and learning the value of hard effort. After graduation, he made a decision that would change his perspective forever. He joined the United States Navy. It was the late 1960, and the Vietnam conflict was heating up. James served as a sailor in the Pacific Fleet from 1968 to 1969. That experience discipline, brotherhood, long nights at sea shaped the man he'd become. He once said the Navy taught him focus and patience, two qualities that later defined his acting craft. When he returned home, he didn't come back bitter. Instead, he came back determined. The world was changing, the civil rights movement was in full swing, black voices were rising, and James wanted to be part of that transformation. But he didn't yet know how. He wasn't thinking about Hollywood or fame. At that point, he just wanted to find a way to tell stories that mattered, stories that could move people the way life had moved him. Those early years, the struggle, the single-parent home, the lessons of service, became the foundation of everything James Avery stood for: respect, integrity, and power through knowledge. You can see it in every role he played later, that calm authority, that mix of discipline and heart. It all started here, with a young man from Virginia who believed he could be more. After leaving the Navy, James Avery came home to a country in transition. It was the early 1970s, a time of protest, poetry, and social change. The civil rights movement had awakened something powerful in America's soul, and for James, it stirred a creative fire he didn't even know he had. He wasn't the kind of man to sit still. He wanted to express himself not through anger, but through art. Settling in San Diego, he started writing poetry and scripts. His first big break wasn't on stage or in front of a camera, it was behind the scenes. He wrote for PBS, crafting pieces that touched on social justice, race, and human experience. One of his works even won an Emmy for production, showing early on that his mind wasn't ordinary. He had the ability to take complex truths and turn them into art that people could feel. But James wanted more than writing. He wanted to embody the words to become the story. So he enrolled at the University of California, San Diego, where he earned a degree in drama and literature. At UCSD, he found his tribe: artists, activists, and dreamers who believed that theater could be a weapon for truth. Professors and peers quickly realized that James wasn't just another student chasing applause. He was serious, man. He studied Shakespeare, Greek tragedy, and African American literature with the same intensity he once gave to his military discipline. What made him different was that booming voice, deep, commanding, but full of soul. Even in rehearsal halls, people would stop what they were doing when he spoke. It wasn't just acting, it was presence. His classmates described him as thoughtful and fierce, at the same time the kind of man who could debate philosophy 1 minute and then deliver a monologue that gave you chills the next. Avery was also shaped by the thinkers of his time, Langston Hughes, James Baldwin, Maya Angelou. He read their words and understood that art wasn't just entertainment, it was identity. He believed that an artist's job was to tell the truth of their people, even when the world didn't want to hear it. That belief would follow him for the rest of his life. During those years, he performed in small community plays, wrote short pieces for radio, and became known around campus as the Voice. There was something magnetic about him, that rare blend of intellect, discipline, and empathy. He wasn't chasing fame, he was building craft. By the time he graduated, James Avery had transformed. The kid from a working-class single-parent home had become a scholar and a storyteller, ready to take on the world. He didn't yet know where his talent would take him: theater, television, or film. But one thing was clear: his purpose was to speak truth through art. Those college years didn't just give him an education, they gave him a mission. And soon, that mission would lead him straight into Hollywood. When James Avery packed his bags and moved to Los Angeles in the mid-1970s, he didn't have fame, connections, or money. What he did have was that booming voice, sharp mind, and the kind of discipline that only a Navy veteran could carry. Hollywood was tough, especially for a black actor back then. Roles were limited, the same stereotypes over and over, and James refused to play characters that mocked his people. He wanted depth, truth, something that meant something. That alone made his journey 10 times harder, man. At first, he took whatever small parts he could get. Guest roles on shows like Hill Street Blues, Dallas, Amen, L.A., Law, you name it, he was there. But even when he showed up for just 1 or 2 episodes, people remembered him. That voice, that authority, he made minor roles feel major. Casting directors started noticing that whenever James Avery stepped into a scene, he owned it. He didn't have to do too much. He just had that energy that filled the room. But it wasn't all glamour. Behind the scenes, he was grinding hard-working stage plays, taking commercial gigs, voicing radio spots, and even doing live theater around Los Angeles. The 70s and early 80s were all about survival. There were weeks he didn't know if the next paycheck was coming. Still, James never lost faith. He once told a friend, "If I stay ready, I won't have to get ready." That was his philosophy. Every audition, every line, every gig was practice for something bigger. Then came animation, and that's when things started changing. His deep, commanding voice caught the attention of producers in the cartoon world. Before long, he landed a gig that would introduce his talent to millions of kids across America, the voice of Shredder in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Yeah, that Shredder, the main villain, the fearsome leader of the Foot Clan. From 1987 to the early 90s, his voice became iconic. Even if people didn't know his face, they knew that voice. It was bold, crisp, and full of power, perfect for a cartoon villain. James once laughed about it in an interview, saying something like, "Imagine going from Shakespeare to shouting at turtles." But he loved it. It was fun, creative, and it paid the bills. More importantly, it proved his range. He could play the darkest villain or the warmest father figure. During that same period, he kept working in theater, refusing to let his classical roots fade. He believed that real acting started on stage, where there were no second takes. He performed in productions of Othello, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and Tartuffe. That Shakespearean energy would later define how he carried himself as Uncle Phil, larger than life, yet grounded. The industry started to see James Avery as that go-to actor for strength, authority, and wisdom. He played judges, lawyers, reverends, men with power and moral weight. But even with all that talent, he wasn't a household name yet. He was respected, sure, but still flying under the radar. That's what makes his story so underrated, man. For almost 2 decades, he was working, grinding long before the Fresh Prince ever came calling. He built his foundation brick by brick, performance by performance, while most people had no idea who he was. But all that experience, the stage work, the voice acting, the TV grind, it was preparing him for something legendary. Because when the 90 came, James Avery was about to step into a role that would change his life forever and redefine what a TV father could be. By the time 1990 rolled around, James Avery had already paid his dues. He had done theater, television, radio, and voice work, everything but stardom. Then came an audition that would flip everything upside down, a new NBC sitcom about a kid from West Philadelphia moving in with his wealthy relatives in Bel Air. Nobody, not even James himself, knew that The Fresh Prince of Bel Air would become one of the most beloved shows in TV history. When the producers were casting Uncle Phil, they wanted someone who could command respect but still feel like family. James walked in, read his lines, and instantly owned the room. That deep voice, that presence, it was undeniable. He didn't just play authority, he was authority. When the audition ended, there wasn't much to discuss. They had found their Uncle Phil. At the time, Will Smith was just 21 years old, fresh off his rap career with DJ Jazzy Jeff. He was new to acting, full of energy but still learning the craft. James Avery, on the other hand, came from years of stage discipline. Their chemistry was immediate, almost cosmic. James became the mentor Will didn't know he needed. Behind the scenes, he coached Will on timing, emotion, and delivery. Will once said, "James Avery was my acting father. He taught me what it meant to be an artist." On screen, their connection was pure magic. Uncle Phil was strict but loving, proud but fair. He wasn't a caricature, he was real. When he scolded Will, you could feel it. When he hugged him, you felt that too. The writers gave Avery powerful lines, but it was his energy that made them timeless. He brought dignity and gravitas to every scene, blending humor with heartfelt lessons. The show debuted in September 1990, and it didn't take long for audiences to fall in love. Every week, millions tuned in, not just for laughs, but for family. The Fresh Prince of Bel Air became a cultural bridge. It showed a black family that was successful, educated, and proud without losing its heart. And at the center of it all was Uncle Phil, the moral anchor. What made James Avery stand out was that he didn't perform fatherhood. He embodied it. You could see his own life lessons, discipline, compassion, patience bleeding into the role. When the camera rolled, it wasn't acting, it was experience. Behind the laughter, the cast was tight-knit. James took care of everyone like real family. He was the one who made sure people showed up on time, the one who gave advice when someone was struggling. Will Smith later revealed that the famous emotional scene when Will breaks down crying about his dad wasn't just scripted emotion, that was real. And when James hugged him, he whispered, "Now that's acting." That moment defined both their careers and became one of the most powerful scenes in television history. From that day forward, James Avery wasn't just an actor, he was a symbol of strength, love, and fatherhood. And even though The Fresh Prince would make him a household name, fame never changed who he was. James Avery carried himself with grace and humility the same way he did back when he was just that young man from Virginia trying to make it. When The Fresh Prince of Bel Air hit its stride in the early 1990s, it wasn't just another sitcom anymore, it became a movement. And at the heart of it stood James Avery, the man who gave life to Philip Banks, a character who represented more than just a father on TV. Uncle Phil was strength, compassion, and authority all wrapped in one powerful presence. Every time he walked into a room, you felt it. That booming voice, the way he stood, the look in his eyes, it commanded respect. Man, James took what could have been a one-dimensional strict uncle and turned him into something human, layered, and unforgettable. Uncle Phil was the kind of man who'd scold you one minute, then hug you the next. He embodied tough love, the kind that builds character. And James made sure that even in the funniest moments, the message was always real: accountability, family, pride, and self-worth. Then came that scene. Season 4, Episode 24, Papa's got a brand new excuse. Will's father, Lou, walks out on him again, and Will finally breaks down. "How come he don't want me, man?" 7 words that brought an entire generation to tears. That moment became television history. What people didn't see was the emotion behind the cameras. Will Smith, still new to acting, was tapping into real pain from his own life. As the cameras rolled, he started to lose it, and James Avery didn't break character. He stayed in the moment, listening, holding the space, letting Will feel it. When Will buried his face into James's chest, that hug that wasn't scripted, that was real. When the director yelled, "Cut," James looked Will straight in the eyes and said, "Now that's acting." That moment defined the show and cemented James Avery as a legend. Fans still say they cried watching it. Some even say it helped them process their own relationship with their fathers. That's not just good television, that's therapy, man. That's impact. But beyond the famous scene, every episode had pieces of James's wisdom built into it. When Uncle Phil talked about working twice as hard, about respect, or about black excellence, you could tell it came from James's soul. He'd lived it. He'd earned that authority. His presence gave depth to the comedy, reminding everyone that laughter and lessons could coexist. Off-screen, the cast adored him. Alfonso Ribeiro, Carlton, called him the backbone of the show. Tatiana Ali, Ashley, said he made everyone feel safe and seen. Even guest stars said you couldn't be around James without learning something about acting, about life, about integrity. He demanded excellence, but he gave love in return. What made him so iconic wasn't just the performance, it was the authenticity. He represented the kind of black fatherhood that was rarely shown on television. Educated, loving, powerful, and emotionally open. He redefined what it meant to be a man on TV. Uncle Phil could argue law in the courtroom one minute and dance at a family party the next. He was complex, proud, and deeply human. For 6 seasons, James Avery carried that role with pride. Every smile, every glare, every lecture, it came from truth. Fans around the world saw themselves in that family. And long after the final episode aired, the echo of Uncle Phil's words stayed with them. James Avery didn't just play Uncle Phil, he became him. And in doing so, he became the father figure for millions who never had one. That's not just acting, that's legacy. By the mid-1990s, James Avery had become one of the most recognizable faces on television yet. Somehow, still one of the most underrated. While The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air exploded in popularity, the spotlight mostly followed Will Smith. James never complained. That wasn't his style. He wasn't chasing attention, man. He was chasing authenticity. He once said in an interview, "If I can show young black men that power and love can exist together, I've done my job." And that's exactly what he did every single week. Even though the show was a hit, Hollywood didn't quite know what to do with him. He wasn't flashy, and he didn't fit the usual mold. James was a classically trained actor with a booming Shakespearean presence in a comedy world that preferred stand-ups and sitcom punchline. He brought gravitas where others brought jokes, and in doing so, he raised the entire show's level. Still, despite his brilliance, he never received an Emmy nomination for Uncle Phil. Not one. That's wild, right? The man who defined television fatherhood never got that industry nod. But you know what? The people knew. Fans flooded NBC with letters, thanking him for representing a strong black father who didn't abandon his kids, who didn't yell for laughs, but taught with compassion. Teachers showed Fresh Prince episodes in class, because Uncle Phil represented something schools couldn't teach: integrity. And years later, when J. Blank, Cole rapped, "First things first, rest in peace, Uncle Phil," it became an anthem of respect. It showed how deep that impact ran across generations, across music, across culture. Behind the scenes, James stayed humble. He mentored young actors quietly, just as he had done with Will. He wasn't about fame, he was about craft. When the show wrapped in 1996, he didn't chase blockbusters or flashy headlines. He went back to what he loved: theater, teaching, and performing roles that mattered. He believed the work should always speak louder than the applause. Still, being underrated isn't always easy. Watching others get awards for half the talent could have made anyone bitter, but James carried himself with dignity. He knew that legacy isn't measured by trophies, it's measured by hearts touched. And when people spoke of their childhood heroes, his name always came up. Even years after the show ended, reruns kept Uncle Phil alive. Viewers who grew up with him now watched with their own kids. New generations discovered that same warmth, that same wisdom. On social media, fans called him the blueprint, the standard, the realest TV dad ever. That's recognition no golden statue could ever replace. What's ironic is that James Avery's calm strength, the very thing that made him great, also kept him from being hyped. He wasn't loud about his success. He didn't need validation. And that humility, that quiet power, made his presence timeless. By the end of the 1990, his peers respected him deeply, but the public didn't realize just how vast his influence really was. He'd laid the foundation for actors like Lawrence Fishburne, Dennis Haysbert, and countless others who portrayed powerful, intellectual black men on screen. James Avery made it cool to be strong, wise, and vulnerable at the same time. He didn't need awards to prove his greatness. His audience had already crowned him. Behind that big laugh and larger-than-life presence, James Avery carried a lot more than people ever saw. He was the type of man who made everyone else feel grounded, but few knew what he carried within himself. Fame didn't make him arrogant, it made him more introspective. After The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air ended in 1996, James kept working steadily, but Hollywood wasn't always kind to older actors, especially older black men who refused to play stereotypes. He wasn't the type to chase roles that didn't mean anything. That choice, staying true to his principles, came with a cost. While Will Smith became one of the biggest stars on earth, James preferred to stay out of the spotlight. He took guest roles in shows like That 70 Seconds Show, The Closer, Grey's Anatomy, CSI, and The Division. He also appeared in films like Dr. Dolittle 2 and Raise Your Voice. They weren't blockbusters for him, but they kept him connected to the craft he loved. Outside of acting, James found peace in quieter spaces. He was a thinker, a reader, a man who valued depth. His marriage to Barbara Avery, a professor of literature, reflected that. They were intellectual partners, grounded, private, and loyal. Barbara once described James as a gentle giant who found joy in conversation, philosophy, and jazz. The two shared a love for learning, and though they never had children of their own, they poured that nurturing energy into their students and younger artists. James mentored countless aspiring actors. Karen Parsons, Hilary Banks, said he treated the cast like family, giving real-life advice between takes. Tatiana Ali once recalled, "James would pull us aside and talk about life, not just acting, about being proud of who we are." That's the kind of man he was. He gave when no one asked, taught when no one noticed, and never bragged about it. But even strong men get tired. Years of long workdays, travel, and the stress of staying relevant took a toll on his health. Friends noticed he moved slower, his voice a little rougher, but James brushed it off. He had always been the rock for everyone else, and rocks don't complain, man. He had struggled with heart issues quietly for years. Instead of pity, he focused on gratitude. He once said to a friend, "I've lived a full life. I've seen the world. I've done what I love." Still, behind that calm tone, there was frustration. The industry had changed. It was faster, flashier, more about fame than depth. Many roles he was offered were either too shallow or didn't respect the kind of presence he brought. Imagine being one of the greatest father figures on TV and still being overlooked for meaningful parts. That hurt, even if he didn't say it. And yet, he kept showing up for the work, for his students, for his fans. When he wasn't acting, he guest lectured at universities, encouraging young artists to study their craft and tell stories that matter. He reminded them that acting wasn't about celebrity, it was about truth. In private, James loved to cook, travel, and spend quiet evenings with Barbara. He was the kind of man who'd rather listen to Coltrane than go to a red carpet event. He was content, but also aware that time was catching up. He talked about legacy more often, about wanting to leave behind something bigger than himself. Behind the smile, behind the applause, James Avery carried a soul of purpose, a man who gave everything to the world but asked for very little in return. By the early 2010s, James Avery was slowing down not because he'd lost passion, but because his body was finally demanding rest. Decades of hard work, countless hours on set, and a quiet battle with heart disease had taken their toll. Still, he didn't let the world see that side of him. To his friends, he was the same confident, steady James, the man with the deep voice and even deeper wisdom. But privately, he knew his time in the spotlight was winding down. In 2012, James appeared in a few small projects, including Go, Bolivia Go, and Wish I Was Here, directed by Zach Braff. Those would be some of his final screen roles. He approached them with the same professionalism as always, never cutting corners, never complaining. He believed that an artist's duty was to finish strong, no matter how small the audience might be. His health, however, was a growing concern. Years of stress and underlying conditions led to complications with his heart. In late 2013, he underwent open-heart surgery in Glendale, California. The procedure was serious, but routine doctors expected him to recover. Yet just days later, complications set in. On the 31st of December 2013, the world lost one of its quiet giants. James Avery passed away at the age of 68. When the news broke, the reaction was immediate and heartfelt. Will Smith posted a tribute saying, "Some of my greatest lessons in acting, living, and being a respectable human being came through James Avery." Alfonso Ribeiro wrote, "The world has lost a truly special man. Every day on set with James was a lesson in professionalism and excellence." Tatiana Ali called him the most wonderful uncle, teacher, and protector. Fans around the globe flooded social media with memories. People didn't just say "rip," they shared how he impacted their lives. Some wrote about growing up without fathers and how Uncle Phil filled that gap. Others said that his words on TV helped them believe in themselves. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was genuine gratitude. In a way, his passing united everyone who had ever watched The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. That final day of 2013 felt like losing family. Even people who had never met James felt like they had. He had spoken into their lives through laughter and lessons. At his memorial, friends and colleagues celebrated not just his career, but his character. He wasn't remembered for fame, he was remembered for kindness. For showing what a man could be: firm but loving, proud but humble, powerful but gentle. James Avery's physical voice may have gone silent, but his impact still echoes in living rooms and hearts all over the world. Every rerun, every quote, every time someone says, "First things first, rest in peace, Uncle Phil." They're keeping his spirit alive. He left us too soon, but man, he left us full. James Avery didn't just leave behind a body of work, he left behind a feeling, a sense of warmth, dignity, and truth that reached far beyond television. To an entire generation, he wasn't a Hollywood actor. He was the father we all needed. That's why, years after his passing, people still talk about him like family. The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air ran for 6 seasons, but its influence has lasted decades. What made the show timeless wasn't just the comedy, it was the heart. And James Avery was that heart. Through Uncle Phil, he gave audiences a blueprint of what fatherhood could look like. Not perfect, not always soft, but steady, loving, and full of integrity. He showed that masculinity didn't have to mean silence, and that strength could live alongside compassion. For countless young viewers, especially black men who rarely saw themselves reflected like that on TV, it was life-changing. Uncle Phil was the kind of man who demanded excellence but always led with love. He wasn't afraid to challenge his family or his audience to think deeper. Whether he was lecturing Will about taking responsibility or comforting his children after failure, his words carried real weight. It wasn't acting, it was mentorship, delivered through the screen. That's why fans still quote him like a preacher. Lines such as, "You've got to earn your keep in this house," or "You are my son, end of story," became part of pop culture's emotional vocabulary. When J. Cole opened his hit song, No Role Models, with "First things first, rest in peace, Uncle Phil," it wasn't just a bar, it was a tribute to what Avery represented, a moral compass, a symbol of black love, strength, and leadership. What's even more powerful is how his influence crossed generations. People who grew up in the 1990s now show Fresh Prince to their own kids. They sit on the couch, laugh at the same jokes, and when that famous scene with Will and Uncle Phil comes on, the room goes quiet. The emotion still hits just as real, just as raw, because what James delivered wasn't tied to an era. It was human truth. Even in academia, Avery's work has been studied for how it redefined the image of African American families on television. Before Uncle Phil, most TV dads were written as either distant or comedic. But Avery brought balanced power without domination, humor without weakness. He made intelligence cool and compassion powerful. That balance has influenced characters like Randall Pearson from This Is Us and Dre Johnson from Blackish. They're all, in some way, descendants of Uncle Phil. The most touching part? His legacy didn't stop at the screen. Many of his former co-stars credit him for shaping who they became off-screen. Will Smith has said multiple times that James was his anchor, the man who taught him discipline, how to control his energy, and how to be present in the craft. Tatiana Ali said he taught her to read literature beyond scripts Baldwin, Hughes, Angelou because art, he believed, was a reflection of life itself. That's the thing about James Avery. He lived what he taught. He didn't just act wisdom, he was wisdom. That's why even years after his passing, fans celebrate his birthday, post his quotes, and call him TV's greatest dad. For some, he was a role model. For others, a father figure. For all of us, he was proof that you could be strong without being hard, and loving without being weak. That's why they still call him Uncle Phil, because you don't call family by their full name. Long after James Avery's passing, his presence continues to echo not through awards or headlines, but through the hearts of everyone who grew up with him. Some actors fade when the cameras stop rolling. James didn't. His work aged like wisdom, timeless, familiar, always relevant. Every rerun of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air feels like a reunion with family, and every R.I.P. Uncle Phil comment under a clip is proof that he's still right here, man. What makes his legacy special is how personal it feels. He wasn't a superhero or a megastar, he was real. Fans write messages like, "Uncle Phil taught me how to be a man," or "He showed me what love and discipline look like." That kind of impact can't be bought, can't be faked. It's the kind of legacy built on truth, empathy, and representation. Beyond television, James Avery's influence rippled through culture in ways few actors ever achieve. Musicians, educators, and even spiritual leaders have referenced Uncle Phil as a symbol of guidance. From J. Cole to everyday fathers raising kids, his image became shorthand for strength with compassion. Memes, tributes, fan art, they all carry the same tone: respect. Even in the industry, his name is spoken with admiration. Fellow actors often describe him as a teacher in disguise. His colleagues remember that whenever James walked onto a set, the energy shifted not because of ego, but because of the calm authority he carried. Directors trusted him, crews respected him, and younger actors followed his lead. That's rare in Hollywood. Years after his death, The Fresh Prince cast reunited in 2020 for a special anniversary episode. When they played old clips of James, his booming laugh, his hugs, his wisdom, everyone in the room cried. Will Smith broke down, saying, "James Avery was the center of our show. He made me a better man." That moment showed the world that his influence wasn't just professional, it was spiritual. He left fingerprints on souls, not scripts. His wife, Barbara Avery, continued to honor his memory through education, scholarships, and mentorship programs. Friends said she often spoke about how proud James would be to know that people still learn from his work, not as entertainment, but as life lessons. That's what he always wanted, to leave the world better than he found it. And that's exactly what he did. In a world obsessed with fame and quick success, James Avery stood for something different. He reminded us that purpose lasts longer than popularity. He never needed a red carpet to validate his worth. His validation came every time someone said, "I see my dad in Uncle Phil." Today, his image lives on in countless tributes, YouTube documentaries, and heartfelt posts. Every time that famous clip resurfaces, the one where Will cries in his arms, new generations discover who James Avery was. They Google his name, learn about his poetry, his Navy service, his intellect, and they say, "Wow, he was more than an actor." And that's the truth. He was more than an actor. He was a mentor, a trailblazer, and a voice for those who felt unseen. James Avery may not have walked away with Hollywood's trophies, but he walked away with something much bigger: eternal respect. Man, even after all these years, that scene still hits like the first time. When Will broke down in Uncle Phil's arms, we weren't just watching two actors, we were watching truth. That's what James Avery gave us: honesty, strength, and love, all in one breath. He reminded us that family isn't just blood, it's whoever shows up when you need them most. James Avery didn't just act, he gave. Every word, every look, every hug on screen came from something real inside him, and that's why he'll never be forgotten. He taught a generation what fatherhood, dignity, and compassion look like, lessons that don't fade with time. So yeah, first things first. Rest in peace, Uncle Phil. You were the realest. You were the heart. You were the father we all needed. Gone, but never forgotten. Rest easy, James Avery.